So, how about that healthcare debate? Had enough of that? Yeah, we're all getting a little tired of it. I know I am. I can hardly afford to be tired of it. It's my job. This past year, discussing this issue, debating it around our nation, watching our politicians dance around the subject, at least it's driven home the point that there's a problem. Maybe most of us recognized that before this past year, but it seems like most of us recognize it now. It's been gratifying to me to see my patients and their families, my colleagues and coworkers grapple with this issue, form opinions about what we should do, try to understand what are the issues involved. It's been a good thing. Glad to see that. Because we do need to address this. It's like we're on a train heading down the wrong track. Off in the distance, we can see a canyon and the tracks just head right over the edge. We need to get this train on the right track. But it's not going to be easy, obviously. It's going to require a change in philosophy, I think, to accomplish this. It's why we haven't accomplished it so far. It's why it's been worsening over years, over decades as an issue, and we haven't been able to solve it politically. The main reason this is a difficult problem, in my mind, is that we have, as a culture, tacitly accepted that we all possess a right to health care. This is something that I think became a popular notion after World War II, and it has only gained ground since then. But it's a problem. Sentimentally, it's very attractive, very appealing. Politically, it's inconvenient to even bring up the subject. But it is, I would say, at the root of our difficulties in this area. The main reason it's a problem is because once we elevate something, anything, to the level of a right, well, then all of a sudden, such mundane considerations of how much money it costs to honor that right are dismissed out of hand. We avoid acknowledging that we have limited resources to spend on healthcare. We are not willing to set limits or respect limits for that reason. It's an unconstitutional and frankly unreasonable right for us to be granting to ourselves. But more than that, it's leading us into economic ruin. How do we throw the switch and put this train on a different track? We have to get away, first of all, from this notion of a right to health care. We have to admit that as much as we want everyone to have access to high quality, low cost health care in our nation, that it's a mistake for us to consider it a right. We need to see it as it is, a privilege, something that we want to confer on our fellow citizens to the best of our ability. But we have to acknowledge that we have limits, that there are limits to how much we're willing to spend on healthcare. Only then can we even hope to establish some sort of budgetary constraints. Only then can we acknowledge that there are methods, there are techniques that we can use to bring down the cost of healthcare outside of overt control by the government. And the fact is, the control mechanisms that our government has attempted over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years have utterly failed. I'm sorry to see that our current federal leadership is continuing to press for many of the same kinds of methods. Methods such as cutting down how much the publicly funded programs pay providers, destined to fail. It saves money, perhaps, at least potentially in the short term, by reducing expenditures. But in the long term, frankly, fairly quickly, it results in providers backing away from providing care for those people who are covered under those public programs, or shifting the costs that are not being recouped by reimbursements from those programs over to individuals who have private insurance or who are paying out of their pocket. There's no real savings in that effort, and there never will be. Doing more of the same thing is not going to solve our problem. We must undertake a fundamental philosophical change and recognize it for what it is. We do not have a right to health care. We ought not to attempt to confer that on our fellow citizens, and we certainly can't afford to fund that approach. Now, as a physician, I would say there is another equally important reason to back away from this notion of a right to health care, and I'd like to talk about that later. But I think it's important initially that we think about this very basic fact. We cannot, as a people, impose upon our citizenry the responsibility to cover health care for everybody, as if every one of us has a claim to each other's goods, each other's resources to accomplish that. We have to stop. Thank you for listening. Thank you for thinking about this subject, and thank you for speaking up with your own opinion.